Good evening, everyone. Hello. Hi. Welcome to another night in the gallery. I hope you are here and ready to learn in some capacity. Maybe ready to accept some knowledge into your heart, as it were. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for being here tonight. Thank you very much for being early. I appreciate it. We'll be discussing... pardon me. As you can see by the Florence skyline behind me, albeit this is a modern picture, we will be discussing the Renaissance, and specifically three major players within it, and between the High Renaissance and the Late Renaissance. We'll be talking about three total artists, all of whom are united by their location of roughly Italy, their subject matter in religious work, and then finally, of course, the underlying theme here is that these three artists all had something a little bit queer about them. Just a little. Debatably more. But I do have to provide some disclaimers at the beginning of this. I am not an expert on Christian religious texts, certainly not Catholic interpretations of these texts either. And a lot of the art that we'll be looking at today deals with the subject matter of the Bible in a lot of ways, because that's what they painted or depicted in a lot of ways. So if you are looking for a very Christ-first way of looking at a lot of this art, I'm afraid that you won't exactly find that here. It is not my area of expertise, and I don't intend to speak on it unless I know for sure certain things about it. So I have elected to steer a little bit clear of that lane, if you will, of thinking. Now, this does not mean that I have nothing to say. I do have more to say, don't worry. Additionally, the queerness of these three subjects who I will be examining and telling you about today are up for debate. They are, for each of them, they are highly contested and extremely contentious claims about them that many have claimed to be part of a larger movement of, quote-unquote, the woke mob or whatever, to reclaim certain people who weren't, or misinterpret history in a way that is advantageous to a certain agenda. That is not necessarily what I think. Oh, hello. Hello, welcome, Lin. Thank you for the raid. Hi, we just got started. I was just giving a disclaimer, because today we'll be talking about historical figures in these three Renaissance artists who we'll be discussing today, and how their queerness is often a point of contention. It is not something I can tell you for certain is true, however, I can tell you that some things line up. Additionally, I am not going to call any of these three people homosexuals. That is a modern term. The term homosexuality as well as coming out of the closet are both extremely modern ideas of queerness, and to assign a label to someone who is long gone by 500, 400 years is historically irresponsible, at the very least. Which is why I'm opting to use the term queer. They could have had something, and it is a lot easier to fit them underneath the umbrella of queerness than it is the umbrella of homosexuality, despite the fact that that might be what we're hinting to in the modern context. However, I will not claim that they are homosexuals. I am claiming that they might have been queer. Thank you very much for the raid, by the way, Lin. I appreciate it very much. This is one of our gallery streams, if you are unfamiliar. And today, I will say again, we'll be talking about the Renaissance. So I hope you're ready. We are talking about three artists today. Let me actually take you through who we're talking about. Today we'll be discussing first Michelangelo. After him, we'll be discussing one of his bitter rivals, Leonardo da Vinci. and then something of an outlier for this group, Caravaggio, who lived some odd, or was active some odd 40-ish years after, or 50 or 60-ish years after either of the previous two were active. Some might look at this lineup and say, Pinch, why didn't you do Raphael? They're frequently considered a holy trinity of the Renaissance, the High Renaissance. To that I say, I don't know. But I'll tell you this much, Caravaggio is very fun to talk about, so please stick around until we get to him, because he has a very funny life story about him, despite its riddled nature with crime, although here at the Pinch Raccoon channel, we don't exactly mind. Thank you all very, very much, and I believe we should be ready to begin. How about you? Alright, so first, shake it up a bit. I think I said the box. Yeah. So first, we will be discussing Michelangelo. You likely know him, Ninja Turtle, and also artist of many, many extremely popular, extremely well-known works, which we will be looking at today, some of which. He is not a painter. Allow me to set this very clear, very quickly. Michelangelo is not a painter. He's a sculptor first. That's what he preferred to be known as, and that is where his expertise lies, is in the art of sculpting. Of course, he was a Renaissance man, as we will discuss a little bit further in our next example. However, he was very good at a collection of things. He was very good at a lot of different things. He wore the hat of an architect, a painter, and a sculptor at various different points in his life, as well as a poet, as we'll see. So, allow me to give you a little bit of backstory about Michelangelo before we examine any of his work. His full name is not actually Michelangelo. His full name is Michelangelo di Lodovico Buonarroti Simoni. Pardon me, I don't speak Italian. Let me say that again, let me just make sure I got it right. Michelangelo di Lodovico Buonarroti Simoni. That's his full name. He was born in Caprese, Italy, in 1475, and his mother became extremely ill immediately after birth. So he went to go and live with a family of stonecutters, which is what the myth kind of says. Where he claims that not the myth, that's what his life story says, but he claims that it was there that he learned how to, understand the chisel, or whatever. It's a little hoity-toity, but, I can see why that would fit. So much of his family really didn't like art, actually. And this is something funny about him that we'll see time and time again. He has a certain fiery temper about him. And he would go so far as to sign each and every one of his letters back home, Michelangelo, sculptor in Rome. Just to really, really dig it into his family that he was making money and he was making a living and having really a great time when his family seemed to not like art, or didn't really believe in it in a certain capacity. So, from there, we will go ahead and look at the beginning of his artistic career, because we already jumped around a little bit, and I do apologize for any anachronisms within the stories of these three, or non-sequential storytelling within the stories of these three. This is more so intended to provide an idea as to the Renaissance in general, if you will, more than anything else. So, bear with me in that. Please stop me if you have any questions. Let's see. So, Michelangelo, you could say it either way, studied in the Medici family in Florence, who were also the rulers of Florence at the time. Because of this extremely powerful connection he was allowed to study corpses, which really let him get a very good idea of anatomy, which, as we will see with Renaissance art, a lot of the point, if you will, is extremely accurate anatomy, right? So that's going to become very helpful for him. So we have actually his first surviving large statue in Bacchus right here, which you know it's a great stream when I have had to censor the very first piece of art that I show you. So this is the first of his surviving large work. This is the sculpture Bacchus, which has a satyr standing behind the Roman version of the Greek god of wine, Dionysus, who is standing drunkenly atop a sort of stone plate or something along those lines, if you. So, of course, a lot of Michelangelo's kind of style is put on full display here immediately. There's certain things about Michelangelo's work that are immediate hallmarks, which I will call to attention. First, there is the medium, of course, stone like sculpture, performed with an hammer and chisel and some other tools as well, but hammer and chisel, right? Likely carved from one piece of stone, if I'm not mistaken. Additionally, I'd like to call attention to, we're actually going to zoom in on this, the androgyny of Bacchus's face here, which is interesting because it kind of goes back to something of a Greek perception, if you will, of the notion of the gods or divinity, because that was a somewhat gender non-conforming idea of how they were intended to be presented. Now, of course, is that entirely intentional? Perhaps. Michelangelo is very much a hoity-toity type, but regardless, it does mean that frequently does Michelangelo blur the line of gender, if you will, between what he's discussing in his work. And this is one specific instance of that occurring, one very early instance of that occurring. So, that's Bacchus. Again, stop me if you'd like to see anything again, stop me if you have any questions, I am more than happy to answer. So, Cardinal Jean de Villers, and I don't think I said that right, in Rome, commissioned Michelangelo for a sculpture at one point in time, pretty soon after Bacchus, actually. Not super long after. And this is actually one of his most celebrated pieces of work, and I'm about to show you La Pieta. So, this is a sculpture. It must be a Tumby connoisseur / J. Honestly. Also, I just realized I don't have chat on screen. I apologize. Let me do that really quickly. I'm going to let you look at La Pieta for a minute while I do this. Just look at it. What do you see? Because what I see when I see La Pieta is something... I see an impossibility, almost, in some ways. Because just look at this. Look at it. How is this a rock? How is this a stone? This is a 6 foot by 6 foot, 6 foot by 6 foot sculpture that was carved out of exactly one piece of stone. And that is obviously impressive, because that means he couldn't fuck it up once. Not a single time. So, La Pieta is a piece that is... So it's funny you mentioned that, PK, saying that you wonder what the relationship between the two is. It's actually part of a larger tradition of work called Pieta, which means something along the lines of the pity or the compassion. Pity implying, in this case, sympathy evoked by suffering or sadness. The two parties here in question are the Virgin Mary and Christ. Christ is lying in the Virgin Mary's lap in this case. And Pieta typically refers to scenes like these when it is doing what Pietas are. Scenes like these are very, very common in Pieta, and typically are what they are. Like, I'm saying that multiple times, but I want to properly demonstrate the concept early. You know what I mean? And this, to me, is one of his most popular, not popular, but incredibly powerful pieces of work. Don't mind the OBS browser source. I'm just putting... That should work. There it is. Sorry about that, everyone. I'm also going to move myself up to you. That way I can kind of point to things. So, something I want to call your attention to here first and foremost, that's the wrong thing. Don't make me bigger. The thing I would like to call attention to for you first is the unfucking believable detail on the cloth here. Look at that. That's nuts. That's insane. That is a stone. This is not cloth. This is not plastic. This is a rock. This is made of marble. How? Look at the softness in the flesh on Christ with Mary's right hand over near his the underneath of his shoulder there. That is nuts, right? That's wild. I mean, hard time this was done with just hammer and chisel. I'm sure that there were other less well-known stone cutting implements used in order to perform larger aspects, smaller aspects of this piece, but regardless, his skill at removing detail from a piece of stone in order to make something of this incredible detail and caliber is what is most intriguing here. I mean, just zooming that back out. Again, this is 6 foot by 6 foot. This is more or less a life-size depiction of either of these two folks here. It took 1 year to sculpt this. Additionally, this is an incredibly important piece for a slightly lesser known reason in specifically the depiction of Virgin Mary, as this piece was excuse me, this was an early piece within the Renaissance, and picking up on Renaissance tendency because this had happened before, but it was, this was really done really well. This is an early piece that depicts the Virgin Mary as young. Usually the Virgin Mary is depicted as middle-aged, around 50 or so. However, the Renaissance was particularly concerned with the idea of beauty, and this led to the Virgin Mary being depicted as incredibly young in a lot of work relating to it. I'm very happy I did not have to censor this one, but also let's just look at it a little bit longer. Look at that. One of my particular favorite details is both, Mary's robe, but also the veins on Christ's hands. We'll go back in. We'll zoom in again. Look at that. That's crazy. Right? It's wild to me that such a thing can exist. Thankfully, this is a piece that more or less remains its impressiveness, and I'm sure, if you were to see it in person, you would have a significantly more impressed reaction than you even are now. But this one is wild to me. It's incredibly wild to me. Still, every time I see it. We will be moving on to perhaps one of the most famous pieces of his work, David. Of course, depicting David of Goliath fame. This took 3 years to sculpt. It was actually a project that was started by 2 other different artists, but was abandoned by both of them for various different reasons. So after La Pieta, after Michelangelo hit it out of the park with La Pieta, he was like, Sure, I can do this. Why not? Yeah, I'll pick it up. And he did. In case it isn't clear, David is a 17-foot tall statue of a man in all of the proper musculature and softness that the human body allows. There were also a lot of questions of how to get the rock in the first place from the others. Well, that's interesting because usually the commissioner would be within the same city, so it would more be like an on-site kind of thing, or you would get just a ton of people to transport it all at the same time. Is generally what I believe was understood about Florence's kind of culture around that sort of thing, and I'm sure Rome as well. David here is to sculpting what the Mona Lisa was to oil painting. We will discuss later, because of course we will. It's the Renaissance. How are we not going to talk about Mona Lisa? Anyway, David is an incredibly impressive piece of work. You've seen it before. I've seen it before. It never necessarily gets... Like, this one I almost feel desensitized to in some ways. Because, like, you never really think that he's 17 feet tall, right? You never think he's that big. And then he is. What else is interesting about David is that at multiple different points in time throughout history, people have had certain concerns over his, nudity, as it were, and something that has been considered... He's 17 feet tall. Yes. It's a 17-foot tall statue. It took 3 years. It's crazy, isn't it? Well, the shit that these guys were able to do, particularly Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci, is baffling. Ordinary people today can't do that type of shit due to various different reasons. But, like, these guys didn't have, like, super proper nutrition. They didn't have half of the shit that we knew now. I believe it is a single piece of marble. I've not seen anything to claim it wasn't, but it very well could be something else, but I'm not positive off the top of my head. Dedication, yeah, right? It's wild. So, after the home runs that were La Pieta and David, Michelangelo kind of got some clout on his name. He's kind of hot shit. Like, he's a big fucking deal. He's a really big deal, actually. And so the Pope at the time, who, mind you, was living just a mere day or two's trip, or a few days trip away in Rome from Florence, where Michelangelo was, decided that he would commission Michelangelo to the Pope Julius II, this is, would commission Michelangelo to design his tomb. Now, that is a really big honor. That is like the most clout you can have at the time. Yeah, they were rivals in a capacity. I'll go into that in a little bit. So the Pope is like, hey, I want you to design my tomb, please. And Michelangelo is psyched. He's so happy, right? And it's great. He's having a great time. But after he bought a bunch of the stone to do it, the Pope did not reimburse him for it for whatever reason, because funding was going elsewhere to rebuild the basilica. So this is when he was in Rome at the time. He spent a little bit of time in Rome. Michelangelo, he leaves. Sorry, I did get it wrong. He was in time, not in Florence. So Michelangelo leaves. He's like, I'm never returning to Rome. He returns to Rome at some point. The Pope is like, hey, listen, man. I know you wanted to do the tomb. I know we didn't pay you back. I know that messed with you. I'm sorry. But here's the deal. If you want to paint the Sistine Chapel for me, you can do the tomb. I'll help. I'll let you do the tomb, because we need the Sistine Chapel painted. And yeah, that'll be the deal. And now here's the thing. Not a fucking soul wanted to paint the Sistine Chapel. The Sistine Chapel was built in 1477, and it was built to the same proportions as the Temple of Solomon, which is a biblically exaggerated temple. which made it fucking huge. It was giant. Eventually, it started to break, and in 1504, they had to rebuild part of it, right? And which meant that it had to be repainted. And so the Pope was like, hey, you can only work on the tomb if you paint the chapel. And the Sistine Chapel, just the ceiling, mind you, just the ceiling, which was what he was, commissioned to do, took 4 years of time. 4 entire years of his life. Oh, Grimsrand, thank you for following. Thank you. Hi, welcome. This is the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Don't mind what's in the back and on the walls. Michelangelo didn't paint that in this exact specific point in time. The entire ceiling is what he had to do. Look at that. What's interesting about the Sistine Chapel particularly is that it's not actually one large united piece. It is a collection of paintings. It is something that is intended to be something of a short form for a lot of biblical stories, which is pretty cool. So he got commissioned to do it. He got commissioned to do it, right? The deal was, I'll commission you to do this job, and then if you do this job for me, I will let you finish the commission that I was gonna do for you previously. That's how the deal worked. But so he spent 4 years up on scaffolding, pretty much, scrunched up against the ceiling with a paintbrush, painting these frescoes on the fucking ceiling of the biggest, tallest, most fuck-off chapel ever. And he was miserable. He was miserable the entire time. He hated it. It's honestly, I would be willing to say, and this is not a historically super informed opinion, as I am at best an amateur historian. I would be willing to surmise that part of the reason that Michelangelo wanted to be known specifically as a sculptor and not a painter is because of the fact that he spent 4 fucking years doing this shit and as a means to an end to go sculpt something, right? So that's what the Sistine Chapel looks like in its largest, kind of most grand form. We are not going to be looking at every single thing that he painted on the ceiling today, although that could be a stream in its own right, and let me know if you're interested in that. That would be cool to do at some point. But we're specifically going to be zooming in on the creation of Adam today, which is not on the screen properly at the moment. So here, let me fix that really quickly. You have no doubt seen this piece before. This is, of course, the biblical story of Adam being created by God. And there are a multitude of interesting things that are performed here in order to emphasize certain points of it. We have, of course, I would like to point out, let me get my pointer out. There it is. So first, I would like to emphasize to you the mountain range here in the background. Let me get my pointer proper. There we go. The mountain range in the background here that is very, very deliberately placed. It's very deliberately placed such as to highlight the division between man and God very, very clearly. There's Anomian Arts, thank you for following. There's another thing here as well I want to point out in this odd red structure of cloth, if you will, that is surrounding God and the other major players in Christianity who would be made by God in the near future. This many have taken to be considered to be like something like a brain, which means that not only is God bestowing Adam with the gift of life, but also the gift of consciousness, which to many at the time was the distinction between man and animal. So that's pretty neat, isn't it? That's a neat little detail. How about that? Of course, as we can see here, the extreme attention to anatomical accuracy is maintained in this piece. Michelangelo spares absolutely no muscle, no bone, no nothing in his depiction of Adam or in God. Another interesting thing about this piece is the depiction of God himself. Michelangelo, as a coming off of the humanist movement a little bit, becomes some. The idea is that humans were the thing, right? And in the Renaissance, people started to kind of come away from that a little bit and be more like, humans are pretty good, but we're something within a larger set of things. We're like, there's a universe out there. We need to figure out stuff about it. We're a creature trying to figure out the world around it. That's kind of where that scientific idea of science came from, was the Renaissance. And that led into art as well. And part of that humanist sentiment that remained from the humanist movement of a century-ish before is the fact that God here looks like a normal guy. The fact that God looks like a normal dude in this means that it's to depict that we are made in God's image. It is a celebration of humanity in a certain way. Because as feisty and annoying, and annoyed, rather, as Michelangelo was, he was someone who would enjoy religion. He did it still. He was a Catholic, right? He went to church. He did the whole thing. And that's just a fun piece of information here. You'd never noticed the brain shape before? I hadn't either, actually, until I'd done a little bit more digging. But yeah. Additionally, there's some other major players here, and I don't want to zoom in just in case I forgot to censor something very, very specific, but we can actually see Eve behind. She's actually the location of one of the sensors. She's the topmost one in the image. We can see Eve underneath God's arm, kind of like foreshadowing that like this is the beginning of the creation story, despite the fact that he didn't have Eve created at the time that he created Adam. It's something of an inherent anachronism, which kind of becomes a little bit popular in the Renaissance. Part of Renaissance art is actually the deliberate misrepresentation of certain things in order to maintain a degree, or maintain, or rather, perhaps promote a fullness of the story, which is very cool. I don't love a lot of religious art, as it doesn't necessarily resonate with me. However, this one is very cool, and I get a lot out of it in this specific case. I'm a bit of a sucker for Paradise Lost, as potentially problematic of a story that is if you read it the wrong way. I'm a bit of a sucker for the creation story in Christian myth. I don't necessarily believe it, but I think it is a good story that has certain endearing tendencies about it that I find nice. Anyway, so we will be moving on to the next piece. Remember, stop me if you have something to say, stop me if you have a question, stop me if you have anything at all. Let's go ahead and hit this next one. So when Michelangelo was in Rome, he actually would also return to fresco painting again after the Sistine Chapel, but here's the funny thing, he would also be doing it in the Sistine Chapel. View Last Judgment, or The Last Judgment. This is actually the wall that is... this is actually the large... Well, not the largest, but like the wall that immediately is in front of you when you walk in to the Sistine Chapel. And it's actually right beneath... Of course, it's right beneath the ceiling. This is an incredibly large wall of art. And there's a lot to bring up about this piece in particular. But I will bring up a few specific instances because unfortunately, there's like fucking 90 people in this picture. Half of them have their dicks out, and I'd rather not have to go and censor all of that. So I will not be zooming in. You're just gonna have to take my word for it. I do believe it could be one of the largest frescoes in the world. I have not seen any evidence to claim anything contrary. I've also not seen anyone claim that. I would have to fact check it for you. I can afterward if you'd like. but yeah, it certainly has to be in some capacity. I'm going to tell you a few little anecdotes about this, though. So we're also going to return to this as well. So there are slight liberties, slight, taken in the Last Judgment. This took 7 years. This piece took 7 years of Michelangelo's life to make, and he was a bit of a sassy man. And upon its completion, or just about its completion, one priest came into the Sistine Chapel after hearing it was completed, and he fell to his knees and prayed immediately. He felt that it was something so incredibly profound that he had to immediately prostrate himself in faith. Another one did not hold the same opinion. This was Biagio de Cesena, or Cesna. He complained about it. He was like, "What the hell? Why are they all naked? This is way too much." He did not like the nudity. So Michelangelo, the absolute kidder that he is, he decided that he would go ahead and paint Cesena into hell, and he would paint him as as Minos, the gatekeeper of hell. As we can see right down, I point to it, like right in my, it's like right there, right here, right at the tip of my thing. That right there is Biagio de Cesena. He painted him as him because of the fact that it would allow him to paint the priest with donkey ears, and he also painted him with his balls getting bitten by a serpent. Biagio de Cesena petitioned to some of his contemporaries and fellow priests to say, "Hey, what the hell? Can make him remove me, please?" And to which they replied, "From hell? You know that there is no escape from hell." There's something to that end. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but the shit that Michelangelo got away with because he was as good as at what he did is very funny to me. So that's just one funny story about this. We will be revisiting this piece, actually, because it took 7 years. Of course, we're going to have to go back. We actually do know of we know of some actual paintings of his. So what's interesting about the pieces so far that I've shown you that are that look like paintings is that they are not paintings. These are frescoes, and you've probably heard me say that word a few times. That means it does mean that it is something painted, but it is something painted onto a wall in such a way as to so it's okay. I just looked it up again just to make sure that I'm giving you the correct definition. I don't want to mislead you here. A fresco is a painting that is done in watercolor very rapidly on wet plaster, which means that it becomes part of the ceiling. Like it penetrates the plaster and it becomes fixed as it dries. So it like becomes part of the ceiling. It's not paint on a thing, it's paint in a thing, if that makes sense. So these, the Sistine Chapel and the Last Judgment, are both frescoes. They are not paintings. This is a very, very ancient form of art. It's what a lot of surviving ancient art is. A lot of Greek art for the time, like the earliest Mycenaean Greek art, is fresco. So it has maintained into the future. Are quite durable. Absolutely. Yes, they're very, very durable. They hold up best when they're indoors, but there are some instances of outdoor frescoes remaining, although they are typically worn and torn in a lot of ways. Let's see. Let's go ahead and let me show you the first of his actual paintings that we will be looking at today. Again, he was a sculptor, not a painter, but he just happened to paint a lot of stuff because people got around in terms of what they did. This... God, I wish I didn't have to show it to you. Fucking the Twitch logo all over it. This is Donitondo. what you'll find interesting is that it's covered in this giant white kind of border. Uh, don't worry too hard about it. It's just that it was painted on a circular canvas, which is something not entirely uncommon for the time, actually, is that people would paint on canvases that weren't remotely normal. People would paint on circles, squares, other such Facebook profile pic. It could be. It could be. I'm unsure. I do believe this is... I'm just gonna really quickly... Oh, interesting. Okay, so this is considered the only finished panel painting from Michelangelo. Interesting. My sources were a little clear. I didn't want to go ahead and mislead you or anything like that. So this is Mary, Moses, and Jesus, as well as a bunch of other people in the background. You're gonna see a lot of Mary, a lot of Moses, a lot of Jesus in this stream. Easy to paint on a circle that's layered flat because it's easy to rotate. That's a pretty good idea there. Additionally, there are aesthetic reasons for it as well, which we'll actually go over with Caravaggio a little bit. There's a specific version. His face. Are they? I think they're round. But yes. Actually, hold on. Interesting. So here's something interesting about this piece that I found from my notes. It's not common for Moses to be painted higher in the composition than Mary. Mary is the the woman, and Moses here is the bald man in the foreground, and Christ is their kid. But it's very unusual for Moses to be above Mary. Mary is typically seated above him in pieces such as these. But what's interesting here is that it's for a very good reason. Moses is actually sitting with his legs crossed and creating something of a throne for Mary. It's kind of, in a certain capacity, reminiscent of what their familial role was in a certain way. Moses was intended to maintain stability and a degree of peace toward the family, and a degree of, how to say... Like, I don't want to say it was like the breadwinner or whatever, but like, you know what I mean? Like, there's a very traditional idea of gender roles. Like, the man goes out and he does certain shit, then the woman stays home and raises the child. Who, in this case, it is held to a degree of divinity that raising the child is, because the kid is fucking Jesus. So, it's a pretty big deal. So, usually, people consider Mary's role to be higher, or holier, if you will, than Moses' role. But in this case, Moses' role is highlighted while also supporting his wife, which is an interesting kind of take about it, I think. Imagine fishbowl skate videos, but as paintings. That'd be kind of cool. That'd be a very interesting mixture of aesthetics. Let's go ahead. This right here is another... Excuse me. Joseph. His name is Joseph. Thank you, PK. Joseph is not... Moses is the one who parted. This is Moses. Fuck. Hi. Person who isn't religious here. I'm here to tell you all about Christian religious art. Whoa. I did give a disclaimer about this. Sorry. Every time I've said Moses so far, except for this one, that was Joseph. The dudes aren't that important. I just got my names mixed up, sorry. Anyway, this is Moses, and I know that one for sure. So this took 2 years. It's just kind of a depiction of Moses. It remains very detailed, very anatomically correct, as we see with a lot of Michelangelo's work. And again, extreme detail, extreme attention to cloth, extreme attention to movement. It almost feels, one of the sentiments that people give about a lot of his work is that it feels as though the flesh, It feels as though the stone is about to come to life, come to flesh. The dudes aren't that important, except to the artist. That's true. What I meant more so is that the dudes aren't that important within the context of Christianity in general, with the exception of Jesus and the apostles. In specifically the Holy Family, the dudes aren't that important. Again, not a Christian. So this is, again, anatomical, and near anatomical perfection, near, like, life-like quality. Additionally, this is Moses, decidedly a dude. It's not every day that we see a lot of dudes in Michelangelo's work depicted with beards, if you will. That's not always a feature of masculinity to Michelangelo. So it's interesting that that choice is made here, and what a choice it is, because look at how detailed that beard is, that beard carving. That's wild, isn't it? We will continue a little bit forward. This right here had to be censored. This is the piece Night. I'm actually going to gather a little bit further information on this for you, because I would be remiss to not actually have. Okay. Interesting. So only the one on the left is Night. Actually, the woman is Night. I believe. Again, this is mostly here to demonstrate Michelangelo's proficiency to, yet again. People consider this to be one of his finest works, specifically the woman, for a multitude of reasons. Unfortunately, I have had to censor it for you because she's got her titties out. Anyway. Of course, Michelangelo, like many other Renaissance artists, was considered and generally used for the purpose of architectural work as well. And this is St. Peter's Basilica, which if I'm not mistaken, is one of the same basilicas that the Pope had to rebuild. So he was involved with the architectural design of this, particularly for the Duomo, I believe. Very neat. Very neat. Again, I don't know a ton about architecture. I can't tell you a ton more, but I do know he was credited in this, which is important on its own. So, we have a few of his last paintings, actually. This right here, his last paintings, these are frescoes, actually, pardon me, were made for his last work, rather, was produced between 1542 and 1550, and these are a series of frescoes for the Pauline Chapel in the Vatican. This is a private chapel. This right here is the Crucifixion of St. Peter. Yet again, quite a few people, quite a few involved parties. Everyone has their own thing that they're doing. It demonstrates the story in as little visual information as possible, which is to say one image, despite the fact that it is a very busy image. That's one of the things about Renaissance art, is that in a lot of ways they have to demonstrate very, very large stories in a moment. And some people go a lot wider with how they depict that, like how we saw with the creation of man, with, you know, having many story elements for later come in and be behind Christ at that moment. Others really hone in on it, which we'll see a little bit later. But Michelangelo tended to get big, if you will. Especially considering he had a lot of space on a lot of walls to fill. This right here is Deposition. This is the depositing of Christ, I believe, as a corpse into the tomb. Yet again, it demonstrates a degree of competence from him. And these three pieces actually he worked on up into the weeks before his death. So there's a degree of roughness to the woman on the right there, potentially sure, because again, Christian. But I would be willing to say that that's maybe because he was sick not he was sick necessarily, but he was dying at some point near there. So who knows? It could be unfinished technically, could not be. And then this is one of the last pieces as well. This is the Rondaninin Pieta. This is another Pieta. This is another instance of Mary and Christ in the sorrowful instance of the dead. Jesus, if you will. So this is another instance of that kind of work. But we aren't quite done. He may have died, but we're not quite done. We have to talk about his legacy. So, he has been widely lauded as having the ability to transform marble into like living flesh and bone. There's an almost like cosmic grandeur in a way for artists who thought to like aspire to his achievements. He is legitimately too good at what he does. It is unrealistic to compare yourself or anything you have probably ever made to Michelangelo, or arguably any of the two of the three of the artists who we'll be examining this evening. He had an unmatched dexterity in carving as well. Quote, "I saw the angel in the marble, and I carved until I set him free." It's a direct quote from Michelangelo, of course. He said it in Italian, not in Anyway, so this stream is called The Queer Renaissance, and why is that? It's because Michelangelo was probably at least a little bit gay. And again, I hesitate to use that term. I do hesitate to use that term, because it isn't necessarily a proper label. He may have been a little bit queer, which is to say that he had a relationship with a man. In particular, the man's name was Tommaso de Cavalieri, who I would like to point out, Michelangelo was 57 and Tommaso was 23. I mean, they were both adults, I guess. They're both adults, I suppose. But really? Anyway. I'll say a little bit more that could refute it later. So here's the thing. His sexuality technically cannot be confirmed. As some folks would be willing to say that, like, despite the evidence that I'm about to present to you for the case that he may or may not have had a romantic or perhaps sexual relationship with Tommaso, people say that maybe Michelangelo was searching for some sort of adopted son or heir in Tommaso as opposed to a romantic lover. Which makes sense. He's much younger, and they had a degree of affection for one another. I suppose you could write that way. Not when you see what I'm gonna tell you, though. Michelangelo actually penned over 300 poems and 75 different sonnets. Not all to Tommaso, but a good few to Tommaso. Some of them were, quote, so homoerotic in nature that his grandnephew, upon publishing these as a collection in 1623, changed the gender pronouns to disguise their original context. He was so hot and bothered for this guy that he had to fucking... His grandnephew was like, this is too much. This is too much. This has got to be for a woman. And that did happen. It then got undone later on after a slightly different historical relevance was discovered for it. Let me tell you about a few of these. Let me tell you about a few of these poems here. I'm actually going to read you a little bit of one, or two of them actually. So this is I'm going to describe to you the poem Silkworm. It sees Michelangelo as being Cavalieri's clothing, tightly hugging his body. Or how about this line from another one? The flesh, now earth, and here my bones, bereft of handsome eyes and jaunty air, Still loyal are to him I joyed in bed, whom I embraced, in whom my soul now lives. You say that about an adopted son? I wouldn't. And then here's one more. This is from a poem called Love's Lordship. This is, if only chains and bands can make me blessed, no marvel if alone and nude I go an armed cavalier's captive and slave confessed. Excuse me? Excuse me? And they're like, no, adopted son. Adopted son. No, he did, like, he sent this to him. He sent this to the guy, and then he was like, oh, let me say Cavalier, which is, one letter away from the guy's last name, and we're going to call it Love's Lordship. Oh, no, yeah. No, this weird, this fucking BDSM poem is definitely normal. Definitely straight. Yeah, definitely a normal thing to express to a specific person. Hey, what the fuck? I think that's personally, I think that's kind of damning evidence. I think that evidence is kind of damning. I would be willing to say, but other people are different. You can't entirely base your opinion as to the potential sexuality of Michelangelo on these, because it is artistic interpretation ultimately. And as much as I would like to say, dude, fucking look at it, I can't entirely tell you that there is only one way to read it. There are other ways to read it. I don't read them that way, and I don't really know how to conceive of reading them that way, necessarily, but there are other ways to read it, I suppose. So, additionally, he hired many, many males to model, and he would write love letters to some of them, particularly Tommaso. Tommaso is actually also the subject of a lot of pieces of Michelangelo's work, one of whom you might find surprising. Let me scroll back a bit. In that, it is widely speculated that Jesus, in this specific piece right here, you'll see him right in the center. Where is he? He's right about there, right? He's got the little sun next to him, little halo of sorts. Yeah. He is presumably modeled after Tommaso, his lover. Come on. Come on. And then also, another piece of his, at some point in the future, through these poems in which, at one point, Michelangelo states, "Love is not always a harsh and a deadly sin." Let's see, what is... Oh, here's Tommaso, actually. I forgot I had this image here. So that's him. A lot of predominantly male subject matter does appear in Michelangelo's work as well. This is the truth of the matter. Which some have taken to mean, oh, like, he paints a bunch of naked dudes. Maybe he likes naked dudes. That's possible. He's surrounded by a bunch of naked dudes modeling for him. Maybe that's what's up. Maybe that's it. And many have refuted that. Many have tried to refute that. It's not exactly airtight. Again, it is conjecture. It's anecdotal. It's not hard evidence. And that is what the issue here is with a lot of these. We will see continually is that people cannot just say yes because no one ever, they specifically also never actually or never directly in the terms that we are defining queerness as today said yes. But he was a man who, to me, was clearly in love with another man. That makes him queer to me. Let me show you one more instance, in case you were not convinced of my point. This right here is, this was a piece that was sent to Tommaso. And this piece is titled, The Abduction of Ganymede. right? This depicts the story of Jupiter abducting the prince Ganymede and bringing him up to Mount Olympus, where he will be his cupbearer, or Ganymede will be Jupiter's cupbearer, right? Which inherently, that myth in the original Greek context was something of a divine justification for homosexuality. Now, so, right, this myth has some weight, and then the plot thickens. This right here was sent directly to Tommaso by Michelangelo. And some have taken it to be that, presumably, perhaps Tommaso was, in mind for the depiction of Ganymede here. Some have taken it to be that this here, the bird, which is supposed to be Jupiter, is a stand-in for Michelangelo himself, and Ganymede is a stand-in for Tommaso, and the two are quote-unquote flying to the height of erotic ecstasy. It's a possibility. A lot of people do cite this because, I mean, talk about mixed signals if that's not what you meant, right? It's actually very likely that the two never actually had sex at any point in time, though. But it's clear that the two shared significant erotic feelings to one another because there's so much evidence, written evidence between the two, because they were apart a lot of the time. Some people claim that Michelangelo practiced a degree of celibacy. Some people don't. Again, people are uncomfortable saying anything for certain on the specific topic because of the fact that it's impossible to say for certain, because he never said for certain. Seemingly, it seemed to torture him, as people have claimed. So, with that, we conclude our examination of Michelangelo for the night. Any questions? Anything to elaborate on? Because we're about to hop into Leonardo da Vinci, who, surprisingly, I did have to bring a sparing amount of his work because of the fact that he is very multi-talented, such that a lot of his work would not be applicable to my expertise. I would not be able to present to you an opinion on it in a way that is beyond superficial, which I have tried to avoid doing. So we actually have not a ton of his work, but we do have what is very important for him. If there are no questions, without further ado, I will go ahead and bring up Leonardo. Do stop me if you have anything to ask. Let's go ahead and get into Leonardo da Vinci. So, you know the guy, right? You know the guy. He's done a lot of stuff. He's fucking Leonardo da Vinci. I would be remiss to hear that someone who is attending an art history stream has not heard of Leonardo da Vinci, which I hope you know. That's okay. That's okay if you haven't. Da Vinci? There it is. There it is. I was waiting for it. I know that guy. He won an Oscar. Leonardo da Vinci is one of the most famous minds of human history, legitimately. He has been depicted in 1,000 different ways and 1,000 different reasons for those ways. And it is almost impossible to actually, detail the amount of different things that he did. He did a lot of stuff. So he's very, very famous as a painter. He got some of the most acclaim from being a painter, actually. His most famous works are the following, which I'm sure you've heard of, if not seen. They are the Mona Lisa, the Last Supper, and the Vitruvian Man, all of which we will be looking at. So he was extremely ahead of his time with his inventive mind. He predicted a ton of inventions. The parachute, the helicopter, the tank. His notebooks, he has tons of notebooks, actually, which were preserved by someone he might have been lovers with. It's I did do a little bit of digging through. He apparently wrote them backwards, so they could only be read in a mirror. What? It's nuts. He was extremely influential in architecture as well, which I am not an expert in, so I will not be touching on extremely. But he did design a 32-mile waterway from Milan to Lake Como. What a goofy man. Yeah. He was also credited with the design of the double helix central staircase, and he helped establish architectural principles that have remained to this day. There's something to be said about him as a intellectual and as a student that I think reflects pretty interestingly. At a time when the learned men were at universities, relied on the authority. Pardon me. No. At a time when the learned men at the universities relied on the authority of the admired ancient writers, Leonardo, the painter, would never accept what he read without checking it with his own eyes. That is a quote from art historian E.H. Gombrich, which I find. Edward the Tank, he specifically wrote it weird because he didn't want anyone to make it based off his notes. Yep. This is true. He was very, very secretive about his notes, as hence why he wrote them backward. He is very, very closely associated with the intellectual movement known as Renaissance humanism, which we discussed a little bit earlier about specifically how people would think of themselves in the world as well as science in the world. And that's what we kind of touched on there. Basically promoted a return to values and ideals of the classical world, which is like, Greek and ancient Roman is what they were referring to, but it emphasized what it meant to be human, and their idea was to improve society by being learned in a great many things, such as aesthetics, ethics, logic, science, or math. This is what it meant to be a quote-unquote Renaissance man. So, we will now begin actually looking at art of his. So this is the piece, The Baptism of Christ. This actually does not necessarily entirely belong to Leonardo himself. This is a piece that was a collaborative work between him and a teacher whom he very quickly surpassed. The reason that we know this, despite him not being credited to the work, is because the fact that his teacher, Verrocchio, had very, very heavy brush strokes, but Da Vinci's were much, much later. So it does not make sense for Verrocchio to have entirely made that when there was someone there who could have also done it in the context of a collaboration. So that's just something about the time. Everyone had to learn from someone, and Da Vinci learned from this guy by the name of Verrocchio, and he would soon return the favor to much of the rest of Florence. We will now move to Ginevra de' Benci. This is some of Da Vinci's earliest known work, and he already, in his earliest known work, again, is breaking convention in a lot of ways. So what is particularly interesting to me here is the fact that he opts, instead of using the direct, on perspective that has been very common for the time, he instead chooses to use the 3/4 pose or 3/4 pose, which is like doing that, right? Which is which would become pretty commonplace going forward for portraiture. So immediately he's incredibly influential in the portraiture sphere of things. We can also kind of get a look at, if I zoom in here, we can get a look at one of his signature techniques that he didn't. Did he technically make it? I do believe he may have made it. Or, yes, he did. The technique of sfumato. Sfumato is something that involves, it's roughly translated to smoke in a certain capacity. And he would frequently do it around people's faces and otherwise body parts in order to discern them from backgrounds. We can see it kind of in this kind of haze that exists around our subject here, right? It's all the way down, save for like here. This also makes use of another artistic technique that was very popular at the time, or became very popular partially because of its use, called chiaroscuro. This one has not gotten her coffee. Chiaroscuro, I believe I'm saying that right. I believe I am. Chiaroscuro is the practice of using very dark darks and very light lights on top of each other, so as to deliberately make contrast and have it such that you could very easily see certain parts of it and not see other parts. So he got pretty famous in Florence, as did Michelangelo, but he, for some reason, which we will kind of maybe discuss a little later, goes to Rome. Not Rome, pardon me, Milan, Italy. This is actually where he spends a lot of his life, despite his fame existing in one place and not being there after that. So he goes there, and from 1483 to 1486, he does make, or at some point within that time, he makes great. Oh yeah, okay, one second. Lovely. I have to re-add the folder really quickly because I censored something in it. Right, this is it. There we go. This is the Virgin of the Rocks. This was another piece that was commissioned, much like how... checking it really quickly. Much like how Doni Tondo was made for a panel in a church, this as well was for a similar reason. It's a painting, and here we see a lot of the same techniques that I mentioned slightly beforehand. This is the Virgin Mary doing Virgin Mary things with her kids and one other party. Something particularly important to Da Vinci's identity, if you will, is his attention to beauty. Much like Michelangelo, both of them were very, very attentive to beauty. They wanted everyone here to be. No longer would we have really weird-looking babies. We wouldn't have really weird-looking women or proportions. Everything was correct. Anatomically and visually, people were correct and they were beautiful. It created something of a liveliness that allowed the work to be more appropriately consumed, because this was meant for public consumption usually. As well as the fact that it would allow for a degree of holiness to be prescribed to certain people. There was a holiness in youth. There was a beauty in youth, right? There was a beauty in holiness then, as well, which was kind of hit home by high Renaissance art. He also painted this piece here. Lady with an ermine. You've no doubt seen this. Well, maybe you haven't. But it's a lady and she's got a little animal. How fun. We again see the chiaroscuro in place once more. Again, I might be pronouncing that wrong. I'm very sorry. Which is, harsh darks and light lights layered on top of one another. And sfumato in play yet again. I hate to keep on bringing up these same two things, but those were his most major contributions to art at the time, and this is something of a cursory glance. It's not the... I've seen enough fakes in Redster to recognize this one. Yes. So those were his most important contributions to art history and art technique in general. But there are a ton more. There are so many more. The attention to anatomy, the attention to beauty, as I've mentioned before, as well as sfumato and chiaroscuro. Again, he didn't pioneer chiaroscuro, but he did use. popularize it partially. This right here, on the topic of anatomy, is the Vitruvian Man. He actually made this when he worked for the Duke of Milan, and he went on a trip of diplomacy to the King of Hungary, and he lived in Hungary for a little while. So he spent a very, very long time studying anatomy at this time. He actually did not make a lot of paintings in this period, but he did make a ton of sketches, one of which being the Vitruvian Man. There are many things just like this that are intended to kind of give the blueprint of people, as it were. He was very, very obsessed in a certain capacity with how people reacted, how people moved, how people would, how things would look when people did certain things. The folds of arms, the wrinkles of faces. He apparently would actually follow around ugly people to be like, I painted so many beautiful people, and to paint the ugly ones as well, to the darkness to my light, or whatever. But it's apparently a thing he did, because he just really wanted to know how to encapsulate the look of humanity, as it were. Which I think is neat. I think that's cool in a certain way. He had, I do believe he probably did get to poke some corpses for that end, but I don't believe it was his, like, yeah, he probably did it. I'm gonna answer you completely. He probably did it. Love the Da Vinci impression. Yeah, that's him. That's him. So, yes, this is the Vitruvian Man. You've no doubt seen this before. It is an example of his anatomical work that he did at the time, which was so influential to the rest of his work from that point forward. We have a few others to look at. This one, you've probably no doubt seen, is The Last Supper. It, of course, depicts the instance in which Christ blesses bread and wine, saying, "This is my body, this is my blood," in order to create the communion, as well as it is one of the last moments before his crucifixion. Here he is sat with his 12 apostles performing this action, such that, even like the basics of life would be imbued with a degree of holiness. So the apostles are, of course, like representative of the church, usually, or in some capacity. This piece would also use sfumato, and I will be 100% honest with you. There are entire books written specifically about this painting. I do not have the time nor the know-how to necessarily detail to you everything that is happening in this painting or what is relevant about this painting. It is incredibly influential. It is one of the most well-known pieces of all time. And for that, there's a futility with a lot of Da Vinci's work in actually describing it, because to do so would come off unbelievably pretentious to a certain capacity. I don't want to do that. I like the accessible in this specific case. Therefore, I will kind of leave it there. It uses all of his hallmarks, it uses sfumato, but also, actually, hold on. There's another Renaissance convention that I do feel the need to tell you about. Renaissance painters and artists in general were very, very interested in symmetry. And this in particular is reminiscent of symmetry because, look at it, it's symmetrical. Christ is in the middle and there's dudes on his left, dudes on his right. Additionally, it is linear perspective. This is something that we kind of take for granted these days in composition, but linear perspective allows the viewer to kind of look into the scene, and it allows it a degree of depth, as well as off-screen vanishing points, or off-canvas vanishing points as well. Which, if you are unaware of what these are, allow me to demonstrate really quickly. I will do so as to do my job. Anyway, so here, I have my stick. So you see how the lines of the room, right? They reach right here, and then those go down here. and kind of like these are leading lines, right? These lead your eye directly to the Lord, or to Christ in this case, as well as these, the leading lines of people, the leading line of the table. Generally, what is intended to be kind of understood here is that the entire image is leading you to look at Christ in his moment of humility. Not even humility necessarily, but kindness, right? That is what it means to be linear in perspective, is to allow you to look into the piece. You can look into it. There's a depth here. It is communicated through these lines that there is a depth to this piece. You can look into it. It's a room, right? Just one thing. Hello, Bonnie. Thank you for the hydrate, by the way. I do tend to shoot out my voice, actually, on these. Hold on. Wait. Fuck, hang on. All right. So, any questions about the Last Supper? I only can really pick out maybe one of the apostles. Again, I gave the disclaimer. I'm not a Christian. I don't know how to pick out all of these people usually. I do my best, but religious art does have aspects of it that go over my head, but I can appreciate the compositional quality. Okay. All right. Let's go ahead and hit the next piece. Our second to last we'll actually be looking at today, for Leonardo that is. And that is, of course, we went from one heavy hitter to another. Actually, hold on. No, we went from one heavy hitter in the Vitruvian Man to the next heavy hitter in Last Supper to the biggest of heavy hitters in the Mona Lisa. So I apologize for the lack of downtime I'm giving you between these, but he is an artist that doesn't necessarily do anything half-assed. This is the Mona Lisa. It is a piece that I do genuinely think does not, it is not done justice if you do not see it in person. I am a firm believer in that. Because, unfortunately, as I am, streaming to you over Twitch, there are certain limits. There's a 1080p limit. The incredible detail and meaningful choices that were made about the Mona Lisa were there are so many of them. A lot of people claim that the Mona Lisa looks different second to second that you look at it. It doesn't always look the same to you. It looks vaguely the same, but you'll notice different things. You'll have a slightly different shape knowledge per instance. And of course, this piece does make use of the same sorts of things that we mentioned beforehand. Chiaroscuro and sfumato, notably, right? The smokiness and the light and dark contrast. Additionally, her face is incredibly soft and in line with a lot of Da Vinci's work, maintaining a somewhat enigmatic facial expression. So there's a specific art historian by the name of Gombrich, I believe I did quote briefly beforehand, said, "What strikes us first is the amazing degree to which Lisa looks alive. She really seems to look at us and to have a mind of her own. Like a living being, she seems to change before our eyes, and to look a little different every time we come back to her. That great observer of nature knew more about the way we use our eyes than anybody who had ever lived before him." Was a quote from an art historian who is a expert on the topic. Another art historian, because again, we're going big. We want to get the professional opinion. Martin Kemp writes on Mona Lisa, "My assessment sounds entirely pretentious. It does happen. The picture becomes a kind of living thing. An attempt to offer an analysis of its aura becomes a futile endeavor." What's really interesting about Leonardo da Vinci to me as an artist is that at all points throughout his life, regardless of who he was in the employ of, which changed a lot, he would be working and learning and teaching new things to new people very, very frequently. And all the while, he was expanding his own pursuits further and further and maintaining practice in each of them. How? He was an architect, an inventor, a painter, a polymath, a scientist, a physicist. He did so much. He did an absolutely insane amount of things within a multitude of different disciplines that it is baffling to even imagine that someone could do that. Right? The legend of Da Vinci is wild, really. And I do firmly mean to say legend. There is truth to it, of course, but he's a legendary guy. So near the end of his life, he was offered the position of first painter, architect, and engineer to the king by King Francois I of France, and he actually lived the rest of his life there and died there, leaving much of his art there, which is why the Louvre has one of the largest, if not, actually no, the largest collection of Da Vinci's work in the world. The largest single collection, that is. His final piece, Saint John the Baptist, was made in France, presumably. And this we will actually revisit. He has an extensive list of achievements. He defined what the High Renaissance was. He's the rock star artist. He helped usher in a new dawn of Western art, and in many ways, Western civilization. He had influential techniques, including vanishing points, sfumato, an understanding of chiaroscuro, and an enigmatic mastery of enigmatic facial expressions. Additionally, his influence in the understanding and accuracy of anatomical depictions and his mind for architecture cannot and should not be ignored. He is a man beyond description. You know what I mean? He's a big guy. And I mean that metaphorically. Big. You know? I can't express to you enough how wild this dude is. Like, he's like, you know the person who you know in your life who you think like, oh, they know like everything. He's him. But so now this stream is depicted in a certain way because for a reason. There is a wide degree of speculation as to whether or not Leonardo da Vinci was queer in some capacity, or a man who loved, engaged with men. There are evidence for, and there is evidence against. I will be presenting mostly evidence for, as I believe it. So he himself, in Florence, was pretty lax about homosexuality. It was a jailable offense, though. It was regarded as acceptable to a certain degree within artistic circles earlier on in his life in Florence. However, the Florentine government changed, and he not necessarily immediately and for that reason moved to Milan, but he did move to Milan at the time. He apparently had frequent relations with his all-male assistants and was once asked if he partook in, quote, that backside game with other men, and answered yes. Now, I don't know of any other quote-unquote backside game. Do you? In 1476, he was actually accused of sodomy, which is code for gay sex, with 3 other men. He was actually acquitted due to a lack of corroborative evidence, which has largely been attributed to his lovers coming from powerful Florentine families, and he did keep a low profile over the next few years, though. So one art historian, Ross King, who wrote Leonardo and the Last Supper, he comes out and he says that he was he was, by our modern understanding of things, a homosexual. However, I don't necessarily want to claim that 100%. I am okay with saying he might have been queer. In his biography, Leonardo da Vinci records, a time in which he was accused of sodomy, never prosecuted and never charged guilty, as the claimants never came forward about it, but it did happen nonetheless. It was, or by the 1500s, it was kind of assumed that he was gay. Like, it was kind of, or queer. It was kind of just like a foregone conclusion. Like, people were like, yeah, right? Yeah, we all know. We all know, right? Florence at the time was rather liberal, actually. People were kind of gay a lot, or queer a lot, but would change later as things began to become repressed by new government. So, Da Vinci moves to Milan at one point. Does his sex life change, though? Not necessarily. No. He actually met his lover in Milan, who is widely considered to be his lifelong lover, in Giacomo. However, Da Vinci called him Celai, which is Tuscan slang for devil. Or little devil, if you... Giacomo was a real bad boy, and was potentially an embarrassment to Leonardo da Vinci, but Da Vinci remained with him regardless, despite not needing it. He was already set up by that time. There's always the question of, was sexuality coded into Da Vinci's work? And it's difficult to say yes or no, because it's very much dependent on the piece, right? His ideal image was a figure that was somewhat ambiguous in sex and age as well. For example, this piece right here of St. John the Baptist, right, does demonstrate that degree of gender ambiguity. It's not immediately sure, and that's partially because of his depiction of certain men as not having beards, or like younger men would not have beards, as well as a softness of the face as well. Additionally, Da Vinci was much less known for musculature, as he was known for recording it, of course, but he didn't really necessarily enhance it or provide like the Greek physique, if you will, that Michelangelo had a tendency to, despite his intensely informed knowledge of anatomy. So there's a softness to a lot of his pieces as well. What does that mean to this? It could mean that his ideal person wasn't necessarily a woman. In that case, that's a degree of evidence. Of course, it's circumstantial. You can take it, you can leave it. A lot of art historians do take it, a lot of art historians do leave it. Additionally, we'll go back to the Virgin on the Rocks really quickly. Again, a degree of gender ambiguity on the person on the right there. We don't exactly know. Or, well, we do, because we know who that's supposed to be in context, but the actual depiction itself is ambiguous to a certain capacity. So, as well, our good friend, and Da Vinci's really good friend, Celai, could potentially have been the model, actually, for Saint John here, the youngest disciple in the Last Supper. I do know of where he is because of the fact that Saint John is depicted right here next to Christ and is the youngest of the apostles, which means that he is typically depicted without a beard. He is also considered the beloved disciple. I don't know. To me, maybe not as cut and dry as Michelangelo was, but that's pretty. I wouldn't. I think it's not damning, but it's pretty compelling, I would argue. Pardon me. Yeah, I gotta hydrate real quick. How are we doing? I have one more thing on Leonardo. About, actually, this piece right here. In St. John the Baptist, again, probably Celi, is... You know something funny? You know something funny? Is that... Oh, I'm gonna... My notes have something that I'm not entirely positive about. That's Leonardo. I'm not entirely positive that I have that in the right section. I might have had it in the wrong section. And I don't have an image for it, actually. So, oops. Anyway. Leonardo, any questions? I think it might be a good idea in the future if I brush up on architecture and other religious art themes to maybe revisit this topic in the future. I don't necessarily think that would be a bad idea. Could be interesting. So Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci actually were two people who very, very frequently kind of not clashed with each other, but there's a very why is my cup still here? There's a very, very palpable rivalry between the two because of the fact that people were typically like, oh, if we're gonna get something, we're gonna go to specific artists. And what really like the glory of it and what the work of it was to get good Catholic stuff, right? So the Catholics would always go to like 3, 4, 5 people, some of which being Michelangelo, Raphael, and of course Leonardo da Vinci. So the three of them are considered like the holy trinity of the Renaissance, but they kind of were at odds with each other a little bit. Not necessarily because they hated each other, although Michelangelo definitely felt it when Leonardo came back to Florence for a brief period in his life. But yeah, ultimately, the three of them were pitted against each other in the free market, the free religious paintings market. So we're going to become very different now. We're going to become actually very different at this point. I'm going to pretty much directly give you the story of Caravaggio's life in a certain capacity. It will be spark noted, pretty much, or it will be abridged to a capacity, but I feel it necessary to tell you some of the misadventures of Caravaggio here. Now, he actually did not live at the same time as our good friends Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci. Caravaggio lived some odd 40, 60 years after the fact, right? He would live in the late 16th century into the early 17th century. And he was a bit of a scoundrel in a lot of ways. So he, artistically, actually, has a few very, very specific things to his name that I will tell you about right now, so you can look out for them as we go through the art, because we will also be talking about his story a little bit as we go through that art. So I'm going to brief you on it first. So he became very popular due to his use of chiaroscuro, which is the same thing that we talked about with Leonardo da Vinci, that use of dark darks and light lights. This is prominent in like all of his work. He was very, very good at it. He also depicted biblical and religious imagery, much the same as the people who we just talked about, but he had a bit of a spin on it. He had a naturalistic fashion with which that he would depict these things through poverty and aging. This, at the time, was very controversial to higher powers within the Catholic Church, but he was very effective in making Christianity accessible to more commoners. He was really, really effective in that. This was done through painting prostitutes as models. This was done by certain things like making the Virgin Mary's feet dirty and certain things. Like, he was controversial in that he wanted a bit of, let's call it realism, if you will, within these stories, which is a staunch difference between how we saw it in Michelangelo and Leonardo's case. Caravaggio was very different in this way, as you are going to see in his actual paintings. So by the age of 6, Caravaggio lost every adult male member of his family because the bubonic plague was going around. And some would say that that likely contributed to his temperament and abandonment issues. Darn. In an apprenticeship, he showed very little early talent for painting or frescoes for that matter, but he did become a very accomplished duelist, actually. This will be important later. The man was pretty good with a sword. So then he lost his mother and his youngest brother, and then he left town for Milan, where he did portrait drawing at that point to keep himself afloat, as it were. He was pretty good at it, and he likely began his career with knowledge and inspiration from other Renaissance artists, like the two we just talked about, and he likely lived in an environment with very little patience of the High Renaissance or Mannerist art in religious work, which I will really quickly tell you about both of those, because artistic movement and how he moves away from that is important to understanding kind of his work. So Mannerism is is like the idea that, you know, in early Renaissance Italy, they kind of reach a degree of perfection, if you will, in just pre-established practices. So therefore, Florence and Rome began to become very, very much more intellectual and expressive in their art, which was typically religious, which, you know, saw a lot of very, very powerful displays of that imagery. Think The Creation of Man, for example, is a Mannerist piece, also a High Renaissance piece, but a Mannerist piece as well. So it saw the rise of a drama, rejection, and a rejection of harmony, as well as a degree of inauthentic portrayal of figures and subject. There was radical asymmetry, artifice and decoration informed the movement. Additionally, we saw a slight decentralization of humanity from the universe revolves around us to we are beings trying to understand the world around us, and it couldn't coincide with the scientific revolution at that time. That is kind of what Mannerism is. It's sort of like the Renaissance a little bit. A lot of people were really interested. Not all of these rules are hard and fast, though, because some people are considered High Renaissance but not Mannerist. Some people are considered Mannerist but not High Renaissance. It's very peculiar. The High Renaissance denotes work of the artistic pinnacle of the Renaissance, and it can encompass a few different artists' work. It's interesting that this art movement exists because it's very much like a good boys club, if you will. So it borrowed a lot of techniques from the early Renaissance in, linear perspective, highly accurate portrayals of people, foreshortening of figures to provide the proper viewing experience from below, as well as trompe-l'oeil effects incorporating architectural elements, which is a highly realistic optical illusion to trick the viewer into the belief that what is in the painting is real, kind of like Roadrunner, as it were. So back to Caravaggio. Now that you have an idea as to how he worked, let's see. So, in 1592, he goes to Rome, possibly because he was involved in the death of a local policeman, so he's out of Milan already, and he really liked the artist Raphael. He was very good. He aimed to recapture Raphael's simplicity and beauty, as opposed to deliberately contradicting that, as Mannerists tended to. So, in 1593-1594, we will actually now see our first piece of art from him. Thank you for working. This is Boy with a Basket of Fruit, in which just really beautiful figure. You'll notice this about Caravaggio, is that sometimes there's a certain erotic intimacy about his work. There's something particularly sensual, if you will, about a lot of the ways that he depicts people. Rosy, near nude, salacious to some, a bit fruity, one might say. This is Boy with a Basket of Fruit, and then also we have another one as well. This is a self-portrait of him as the Roman god Bacchus, which you'll know we actually did see a depiction of earlier as well. And what's also interesting, we will have seen another person in all three of these artists' depiction as well, who isn't Jesus. We'll see Jesus every time, because it's the Renaissance. But there's another one who's like the direct subject matter. So this is Sic Bacchus, as it's also called. This is a self-portrait. Again, there's a decorative aspect, there's an eroticism to this, but more than anything else, there is a darkness in the back here. It is deliberately very different from the foreground, and that is for a multitude of reasons. But what is most notably on display here is his use of chiaroscuro, the, again, light and dark practice. Now, he was very good at this, and we will continue seeing this throughout the entire body of his work. It is his hallmark. He did this constantly. I cannot hammer that home enough. At one point, after these two were made, he left an apprenticeship, partially because he got kicked really, really hard by the person he was working for's horse, and then instead went to go work with a priest, Monsignor Fatin Petrigiana, who was interested in painting the grotesque. He was particularly so interested in it that he really liked painting things that looked weird or partially gory or wrong, and we will see this in Caravaggio's work. So our boy Caravaggio painted a lot of self-portraits at this time, but a lot of them are lost actually, except for this one, which is Boy Bitten by a Lizard, which is inherently intending to demonstrate a degree of desire, the repercussions of desire, as it were. And he is being harmed for this, right? He's excuse me, 1 second. I need to grab a beverage right quick, just excuse me. So, once again, chiaroscuro. I will be saying take a shot every time I say it at this point. As well as the notion of kind of intimacy, if you will. The way that he depicts this person in this specific moment is really, really capturing to a certain capacity. It's soft, it's intimate. Right? Right? I don't think I'm crazy for saying that. So he, at one point in his time in Rome, he decided to kind of set a trap, actually, to get a specific cardinal to buy his work, Cardinal Francesco Maria del Monte. And one of the pieces that he kind of set the trap for him to purchase was this one, the card sharps. Basically what happened was there was a little art store right outside of the church, and he knew that the cardinal would be walking past there at some point in time, so he got in contact with a very specific, very, very particular art dealer, who he was like, hey, can you put my work in your front window, please? And he just basically baited the guy into getting a bunch of commissions from Caravaggio, the scoundrel. But yes, so this is a piece that is just depicting some people playing cards, and it's rather interesting. You don't necessarily, whenever you see cards in paintings, they're usually much later, and it's not that they didn't exist or that they couldn't be in work, but it's interesting to see that, especially as a lot of high art at the time didn't necessarily include that sort of thing. Games of the people, as it were. Caravaggio was very much a artist of the people, in some ways. This is a piece called The Musicians. So this was commissioned by Del Monte after Caravaggio was taken under his wing. And it was, he got commissioned for multiple pieces because he successfully bait and switched the cardinal. This is one. And it also managed to get a lot of other eyes onto Caravaggio to get a lot of commissions there as well, as we will see in this other self-portrait of him as the Roman Romanized version of the Greek god Dionysus in Bacchus. This one, he is not ill. This time, he's just, right? There's a certain "I've been waiting for you" tendency about this as well. And there's an opulence. There's a degree of decoration that we will see, which is important because Caravaggio is a card sharp. Yeah. What we will see is that Caravaggio will be someone who kind of ushers in the Baroque era of art, actually. Or as a harbinger, if you will. He didn't become incredibly popular. He was more so brought back to prominence later on in his life, or not in his life, but in his artistic legacy. But he is someone who kind of predicted the idea of Baroque at the time, which is to say having things just be everywhere, just so much decoration. As well as this piece. This piece is really cool. This piece has a lot of really cool stuff about it, actually. This is the head of the Medusa, and this one was painted on a circular portrait because it was actually meant to be draped over specific wooden panels, and this was supposed to reference a Greek tradition of painting Medusa on your shield so as to reference divine victory, in a way, in the story of Perseus versus the Medusa. So this one's really cool to me because it has a very practical, very interesting reference to a different kind of tradition that you don't always see with painting from this time. It's very non-traditional in that way of how it was intended to be demonstrated. In some, you could put it on a shield and it would be in the right place. So a lot of his work got rejected on the basis of blasphemy or indecency. He would frequently put religious figures and scenes in then modern context. So a lot of religious figures would be wearing, for the time, contemporary clothing, and there would be for the time contemporary furniture as well, which was not a popular thing to the Catholic Church. They didn't necessarily appreciate that. This particular piece, for example, is the Supper at Emmaus, or Emmaus, perhaps. Another such instance of a biblical story being used to that end. This is the Taking of Christ. This is one of his most famous pieces and one of the most consistent depictions of, or one of the most prominent depictions of, or uses of chiaroscuro in his work. Here, there is actually a lot to talk about, so I will be kind of stopping at this one for a little bit. We see a tight composition, which is very uncommon for the time, actually. There aren't necessarily a lot of instances of people being this close together in a not inherently intimate scene. The kind of violence on display here, or the beginning of the violence on display here, is heightened by the fact that all of these players are extremely densely packed within one another. And that is kind of implied that there are more people around this. This kind of creates the idea that you are looking into a brief moment in the story of Christ. You are seeing a brief moment of violence in his life. And I find that to be interesting. The fleeing man here is presumably John the Evangelist, again, John, and he kind of represents all of the fleeing apostles. And he's actually being held back by a red sort of scarf sorts, which is being kind of implied to be martyrdom, or it can imply martyrdom as the blood of Christ, because it is hanging directly above Christ, who is dressed in red. If you're looking from the left, he's the second face. There's one who looks like he's ascending into the void. Yes, that is John the Evangelist. Something else that's really interesting about this piece, actually, I would like to zoom in really quickly, is that the hair of John the Evangelist and of Christ is kind of morphing into itself. It's kind of creating an idea that Christ and the church, who usually the apostles are representative of the church, and as John the Evangelist in this specific case is representative of all of the apostles, it's making kind of the implication that, well, the Christ and the church are one, which consider the audience, consider the people who were commissioning this. That would be a very popular thing for people in the church who were paying for this art to want to be depicted. And that is one thing that is depicted in Taking of Christ. Because as much of a scoundrel as Caravaggio was, he was a man who liked work. Or who liked getting paid. So that's just something to consider. But yes, there's a lot to like about this piece. I find it very captivating, electric in a certain capacity. There's a movement about it as well that depicts this moment in a really kind of tragic way, right? Because it's the betrayal of Judas to Christ. This is what I do know, and that is a sad, tragic moment because as much as it was, laid out beforehand, if you will, it was something that had to happen. That was a moment of sadness within Christ's life, and that is what it's typically understood as to a degree. So it's interesting to see this volatile of a scene at effect. So there was a bunch of other stuff that he also did. I'm actually going to show you this piece really quickly. This is called The Incredulity of St. Thomas. I don't actually know what's happening right here, but this is one example of gore that he would do. Just sticking a finger right in that wound. It's skeevy, isn't it? So like how we talked about the grotesque, this is one such instance of that. Caravaggio would not shy away from such things. So, Caravaggio had something of a criminal record. He participated in all of the following: throwing stones, carrying swords and daggers in public, defacing a property over an insult, inflicting grievous bodily harm, and starting a brawl with a waiter over an order of 8 cooked artichokes, where the artist smashed the man's face with a plate. Those around him were reluctant to report him for this instance, as they feared repercussions from Caravaggio or his affiliated patrons. He was a man who got away with murder. Quite literally. Well, maybe actually literally. He might have been involved in the death of that one policeman. But so, we will actually now observe 2 more of his controversial pieces in the Madonna of the Palafrenieri, and then after this, the Death of the Virgin. These 2 pieces are controversial due to the fact that they are the characters that were being used as models, or the models for the characters rather, were prostitutes, and they depicted Mary and the apostles as refugees, which makes sense because they were politically oppressed at the time. However, it is far from the notion of divine beauty of these people and these specific characters that was typically appreciated by the Catholic Church. They were very controversial for this. I'm going to go back to the first one because I barely showed it. But the notion of poverty to these extremely religiously relevant characters was controversial. So then he killed someone. Caravaggio at one point kills a guy who is a hustler and a pimp by the name of Ranuccio Tomassoni in an illegal duel. Remember, he's a duelist. They were potentially dueling over the affections of a prostitute by the name of Melandroni, who did model for him in some of his paintings. We can tell that they were dueling over this because of a very fun quirk in Renaissance culture. So at the time, in Renaissance Italy, they were very, very high and mighty about wounds. They were very, very, uptight about them, or very cognizant of them. So if you got wounded on the face, for example, that would mean that it was a besmirching of your character. It was something to say that you were something of a liar, or something of a incredulous person to some degree, right? Or some kind of betrayer, something about your character, right? So he accidentally killed the guy because he wounded him near his groin. So it killed him, but what was likely was that it was intended to actually cut his dick off, or at least wound it, because it would be more thematically appropriate in a duel relating to the affections of a woman or a wife to attempt to sexually cripple your opponent. I must say, there's a certain fun in the Renaissance, isn't there? Just the notion of things. Like, I love the over-the-top symbolism, the drama. It's such a dramatic time, really. People are way overblown. People's egos are way overblown. The things people do are way overblown because people are just mean to each other all the time. It's so funny to me. So, I think that's a funny story that you should have known. Hello, Enchanted. Good to see you. So, after this point, there was a bounty on his head, and by that I mean literally just his head. They were willing to accept the bounty if you cut his head off and brought it to them. Which leads us to the next piece of his that is going to be important in his life. This is David with the head of Goliath. This is another piece depicting David, and this time also Goliath, but this is actually a self-portrait. This sees David, who has a sword. You can't see it very well, but he has a sword that says, let's see, it's an acronym of sorts. It says HASOS inscribed on it, which can mean humility kills pride in Latin. So there is so this one's pretty obvious as to what it means, right? It's him with his head cut off. He's a wanted man, or his head, literally. But there's a lot more. This is David holding Goliath's head. That's a biblical story, right? Typical for the use. And he would paint this specifically for the papal nephew, the nephew of the Pope, Scipione Borghese. Again, sorry, I don't speak Italian. So it depicts David, pitifully, notably, or perhaps sympathetically, looking at the head of Goliath, who was modeled after Caravaggio himself. It was an act of humility that would hopefully assist in a plea deal of sorts to spare Caravaggio's life. Some would consider David to be modeled after his assistant and potential lover, Boneri. However, others claim that it's actually Caravaggio rejuvenated, which, if true, would make this a double self-portrait. I don't necessarily buy it. So, again, chiaroscuro, the light versus the dark. There's also comparatively extreme gore in this piece. Look at that! The tendrils of his head and the blood pouring out of the neck there, only obscured by the beard. That is way, way gorier than we see in a lot of other work. Way, way more so. Additionally, there are a number of leading lines that will allow us to see and manage to lead our eyes back to Goliath's head. These include David's arm, the actual sight of David, David's sight line is pointing us there, as well as the sword, as well as the folds of the toga will also do this. So our eye is being brought directly to the object of humility that Caravaggio was intending with this piece. This is a moment, due to David's incredibly sad expression at the death of Goliath, is that this is not an image depicting David's victory, as would be the popular narrative given by biblical proprietors of the time, or for, if you will, biblical disseminators, if you will, of the time. This is instead a moment of Goliath's death, not David's victory. They are the same, but they're different. This would be more glorious. David would be less remorseful about this if it were just his victory. No. This is Goliath's death. So, he was, a fugitive, and let's review. He's a fugitive, and he is like, oh shit, I have got to get back on their good side. I'm gonna make a painting that's basically me saying, hey, I'm sorry. And this is what this is. So he fled from Rome at that time. He went to Naples. He did some art there, and then he went to Malta, where he tried to join the difference between a zebra dying and a documentary about zebras versus a documentary about lions. Exactly, actually. I like that. That's a good metaphor. That's a very apt way to call between that. So he went to Malta, where, because he still was not spared actually after making this piece, he was like, oh shit, what should I do? I can use a sword, so I'm actually going to join up with the religious military order, the Knights of the Order of St. John, where he would automatically qualify for a pardon in Rome if he were accepted. To the end of joining, he painted pieces to honor some of the order's members in this specific case, including the two following: the portrait of Antonia Martelli and the portrait de Alof de portrait of Alof de Wignacourt and his page. Now, this second one here, the portrait of Alof de Wignacourt and his page, was liked so much by Wignacourt that he personally petitioned the Pope to allow his admission into the order, which was accepted. And he later began the largest of his paintings, which is the following. Excuse me? Hang on. One moment. Something's wrong. I need to... Actually, hold on. Am I missing some? Are some of them just straight up not appearing in the thing? I wonder why that is. Interesting. Tell you what, here's what I'll do. Brief moment of respite. Rest your ears for a moment. We're just going to go ahead and add ourselves their slideshow. Pardon the scuff here. One of these streams never happens without any. I'm going to put this into place now. Go ahead and slap that right there. Hide Caravaggio and go ahead. Is the formatting wrong or something? That's really troubling, actually. Huh, okay, tell you what. Nice. Tell you what, here's what I'll do. I am actually just going to show you these in order. So first we have the beheading of St. John here. Sorry, what kind of It's not letting me put it in. What the fuck? Pardon me. Is the image too big? That's entirely possible. Pardon me, sorry. Went to your first pride. Very cool. Very happy for that. Ugh, how annoying. What else do I need? I need, Peter. How are we all doing tonight? Do we have any questions, actually, about Caravaggio's to this point? The martyrdom of... What's his KD ratio on duels? That's a great... I want to look that up, actually. I might look that up. That's a good... That's a fun question. I like that. I'll look that up in a second here. Let me just really quickly make sure that I can actually put this one in. Yes. Yes, I can. Good. Actually, wait, I could put them all in. Apparently. It just took a while. That's annoying. How bad was Veggies? They salted someone over them. I'm not sure, actually, about how that worked. Caravaggio duels. What if I look up that? It doesn't necessarily seem to have his entire criminal record at the moment. However, all of everything that he gets depicted as is that he's a murderous artist. Anyway, duels are hot. La Maupin. La Maupin. La Maupin. I have now sourced the images, despite apparently they were fine before, whatever. Anyway. Here. Please don't be super big. It's super big. Okay, 1 second. I have to make the image really small. Is the beheading of St. John, is what we're waiting for at the moment. The beheading of St. John was specifically a piece that was such that it would be the piece that is his biggest one, and it was going to be unveiled at the time of at a very specific moment, right? There was going to be a party for it because they threw parties over fucking everything at the time, and for some reason, come on, I'm already at the next part. Why is it invisible? What? Okay. You know, whatever. You're gonna have to take my word for it on it. I'm sorry. Be weird. Okay. That has never happened to me before. Wait. Yeah, I'm sorry. You're gonna have to take my word for it. Anyway, what's not important is necessarily the piece, despite the fact that it's a pretty good piece. The night before the beheading was supposed to be unveiled, he just shot a guy. He shot a senior knight of justice. He gets thrown in jail, and then he escapes. And now he's wanted in Rome, and in Malta as well. But he escapes to Syracuse in Sicily. He continued painting things for churches all over. But it didn't seem to stop him that he was now wanted again. However, what did stop him was 4 Maltese men attacking him outside a bar, wounding his face and head, suggesting an attack in revenge. So he has 2 last works. Because he was wounded pretty bad at this time in The Denial of Peter, as well as this one here, The Martyrdom of Saint Ursula. And what is notable about these that is kind of hard to see unless you have a very trained eye is that both of these pieces were performed shakily. They have a very shaky brushstroke quality about them, which could suggest that at the time he was suffering from either a degree of vision damage or hand damage, potentially both, maybe both. So he was pardoned in Rome at one point, actually, and he set off to go there, but on the way he was detained and imprisoned, and his work continued along the road to Rome. He was released, and he began his journey again. Right, he began his journey again, but he collapsed and died along the way. At the age of 38, he died and was buried in an unmarked grave. Tough life. But he has a pretty decent artistic legacy that we can look at, thankfully. So he was an exemplar of the late Mannerist style, which in some ways deliberately kind of twists what we talked about with Da Vinci and with Michelangelo, is that things aren't always supposed to be beautiful. It's a intentional lack of beauty being presented in that case. And he was a harbinger of the Baroque era. There are actually only 21 works definitively considered his, and he had some significant influences on the Romans, who began imitating him in 1605. He influenced Rembrandt, Velázquez, and many others, but he was actually forgotten for a long while until an art historian in 1951 put his work into an exhibition. Now, we have one more thing to talk about Caravaggio. We have one more thing to talk about, and it's actually another story. How about that? So in 1602, Caravaggio painted something of a rather homoerotic depiction of Cupid, which is called Amor Vincit Omnia. Amor Vincit Amor Vincit Omnia. Please tell me. Okay, we're good. Okay, this is the censored one, we're fine. This was accepted as kind of inherently pornographic at the time. Right? So the Amor Vincit Omnia means love conquers all, or victorious Cupid is how this is also known. And it very, very overtly draws the viewer's gaze toward the completely, the erect penis of the model, which led many to thinking that it was something of an admission of sodomy. While some consider the work to be an exercise in defiance through sexuality, others have claimed some type of intentional destruction, taking the reverence for the male form that Michelangelo loved and making it into something trashy, right? For a harsh critic by the name of Baglioni of Caravaggio's, Amor Vincit Omnia confirmed the rumor that Caravaggio and his male assistant Cecco Boneri were lovers, right? This caused a feud that would land Caravaggio in prison for a time, which is not his first time, nor will it be his last, but he would later be released and all charges were dropped at a later date. Again, there's just a lot of eroticism in Caravaggio's work. Like a lot of it, actually. Like here, let's go back. I'll hide this one in case that one wasn't evidence enough. There's many instances, such as in, let's see here, going back, this painting of Bacchus. This painting of the, that's Bacchus again, this painting of the musicians. There are plenty of these in John the Baptist as well, and boy getting bit by lizard, or boy bitten by a lizard, rather, pardon me, or in Sick Bacchus. Like, there is a degree of eroticism about a lot of his work, a degree of softness, a degree of masculine youth, if you will, that just makes all of his subjects very pretty. he has a very, very regularly debated history of queerness. It isn't necessarily cut and dry one way or another as to what evidence counts for Caravaggio's queerness in some capacity. Now, this can mean a lot of things, right? This could mean that it was a legitimately possible thing. Why does it... It's just auto-scrolling. Please stop. Anyway. Some say yes, some say no. Caravaggio's work and androgynous and beautiful depictions of men are, to me, emblematic of some form of not entirely straightness. Others do claim misattribution of 16th and 17th century codes of sodomy as false signifiers of homosexuality. Which is possible. It's possible. But, I don't know. If he's got an assistant who he puts in a lot of his work, he constantly draws them as really pretty, and they're rumored to be together, and then he also gets accused of sleeping with the guy. I don't know. To me, if the shoe fits, right? Regardless, though, to some, he has been accepted as a queer by a lot of queer folk as a queer artist of a kind, despite the fact that he killed people, which just goes to show that we are not just for gay rights; we are for gay wrongs as well. And with that, this brings me to the end of our discussion tonight. That's everything I have for you at the moment. It's interesting to kind of discuss and examine the inherent, like, a lack of ability to say confirmably whether someone was queer or not at the time. Because, of course, homophobia and homophobic legislature goes back a really long time. Western civilization has very rarely, if ever, been super, super into it, with a few notable exceptions in some of our favorites, like Greece and whatnot. But even then, it's a little peculiar. Queer rights are very important, and I hope that this Pride Month, seeing some arguments for some positive geniuses being queer maybe helped any of you queer folk in the audience today. Because what's really important about queer history and the knowledge of queer history is the fact that queer people have been around. There's a trans Roman emperor at one point. There's been people who've been doing it for a really long time. There's artists, there's musicians, there's politicians, there's plenty of people who have always been here and always will be here. It isn't an invention of the last 100 or 200 years. It's been a thing, and will continue to be a thing, forever. We were here the same time as you were. To some, person who disagrees with me, I'm saying that, to that kind of audience of people. Yeah. Hopefully this was a good time for everyone. Let me know if you have any questions. I will be posting a zip file of all of the uncensored work in my Discord as well, which you can access by typing !Discord in chat if you are not there already. In case you would like to, for yourself, have a file of any of the work that we discussed today, to, use a wallpaper or have in your little personal connection, coffers or whatever, that's something you can do. There's also a number of other things that happen when you join the Discord as well. You can stay up to date with me, stay up to date with original soundtracking, and all other forms of content that I do. Typically, when I post a schedule, it gets posted first in there, and you will always know when I'm live. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming and hanging out with me this evening, and thank you, everybody, for supporting me throughout this entire weekend of content. I've been really, really blessed to be able to have this big of a weekend of events and have my work pay off pretty handsomely. I appreciate it a lot. Thank you very much, again, for letting me ramble to you about 400 years ago guys who painted dicks a lot. Anyway, without further ado, I believe it's time that we got a raid together and got on our way out of here. I'll see you all maybe tomorrow on a different channel, or maybe at some point Tuesday or Wednesday. Have a lovely night, everybody. Thank you. Let's see here. Who are we gonna raid? To 17th century opera singers wouldn't be as hard as they are to cover in this fashion. That does sound very interesting, but that's a little bit out of my out of my wheelhouse. I was already dipping into a few other practices that I'm not super familiar with already. I do appreciate your faith in me and being able to do it, though. We, I think, are going to throw a raid over to Arrivederci, excellent presentation. Oh. Oh, I know. She actually just went live. Into okay, never mind. Apparently, Twitch has not updated enough for me to do that. We're gonna throw it over to... We're gonna throw it over to two friends, actually. I have not rated Sasha in a minute, who is currently streaming with Nyx and playing Trepang 2. Go ahead and hang out with Sasha for me, if you'd be so kind. Without further ado. Here is the raid. And here... I forgot you can't see her. Whoops. Darn. Okay. Oh well. I can't see stuff, but she's here. We're about to get going. Thank you very much. Use the emotes if you can. I appreciate it. Go send Sasha some love from me and from you. I have been Pinch. You've been delightful. Have a great night. And check your pockets, by the way.